Sophie Chen stood in the empty art gallery, her father's life work, and felt her heart break into 1,000 pieces. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air like tiny dreams floating away. The walls that once displayed magnificent paintings now stood bare, stripped of their beauty by creditors who showed no mercy. Her father had poured 30 years into building this place. Every painting sold, every artist discovered, every smile from a customer admiring a piece had been his joy. But cancer had taken him 6 months ago, and the medical bills had taken everything else. Now Sophie stood alone, watching the final pieces of his legacy disappear. "Miss Chen, we need your final signature." The bank representative, a man with tired eyes and a worn briefcase, stood by the front desk. His voice carried the weight of delivering bad news to many times. Sophie walked toward him slowly, her sneakers making soft sounds on the polished wooden floor. She wore her usual outfit of jeans and a paint-stained sweater, her long black hair pulled into a messy ponytail. At 22, she should have been worrying about her art degree and weekend plans with friends, not the collapse of her family's world. "There must be another way," she whispered. But even she knew the words were empty. The representative shook his head. "I'm sorry. Without immediate payment of $800,000, the bank will seize the property tomorrow morning." $800,000. The number was impossible, a mountain too high to climb. Sophie had exactly $3,000 in her savings account and a part-time job that paid minimum wage. An unexpected visitor at the bell above the gallery door chimed, its cheerful sound at odds with the somber atmosphere. Sophie looked up to see a woman entering, her presence commanding immediate attention. She was elegant, probably in her 70s, with silver hair styled perfectly and wearing a suit that probably cost more than Sophie's yearly rent. "Sophie Chen." The woman's voice was crisp, authoritative. "Yes, that's me. My name is Victoria Stone." She paused, letting the name sink in. Everyone in the city knew the Stone family. They owned half the real estate downtown and ran one of the most successful technology companies in the country. "I have a business proposition that might interest you." The bank representative gathered his papers quickly, sensing this conversation was private. "I'll return tomorrow morning, Miss Chen." He left the door chiming again behind him. Victoria Stone walked through the empty gallery with the air of someone evaluating property. Her shoes, expensive heels, clicked against the floor with purpose. "Your father had excellent taste. I purchased 3 pieces from him over the years." "Thank you," Sophie said, confused about where this was going. Victoria turned to face her directly. "I'll pay all your debts and save this gallery. In return, you'll marry my grandson for 1 year." Sophie felt the room tilt. "Excuse me?" "You heard me correctly." Victoria sat on the bench in the center of the gallery, crossing her legs elegantly. "My grandson, Nathaniel Stone, is 34 and brilliant, but stubborn. His grandfather's will states he must be married before his 35th birthday to inherit full control of Stone Technologies. That birthday is in 3 weeks. Why me?" Sophie's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Ash! Because you need money desperately. And unlike the society women who chase my grandson, you have no interest in his fortune permanently. You'll sign a contract, play the role of his wife for 1 year, and then walk away with your gallery saved and a substantial payment for your trouble." Sophie sank onto the bench beside Victoria, her mind spinning. "This is crazy. This is business." Victoria pulled out a folder from her designer handbag. $800,000 for your immediate debts, plus $50,000 monthly for your cooperation, and a final payment of $1 million when the year ends. Your gallery will be yours, free and clear. The numbers danced in Sophie's head. She could save everything her father built. She could keep his dream alive. "What would I have to do?" Sophie asked. "I'll live in Nathaniel's home. Attend social functions as his wife. Maintain the appearance of a real marriage." Simple enough. Simple. Nothing about this was simple. The cold contract 2 days later, Sophie sat in a leather chair inside the most intimidating office she had ever seen. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. The desk was a massive piece of dark wood that looked like it cost more than a car. Everything screamed power and money. Nathaniel Stone sat across from her, reading through the contract with an expression carved from ice. He was devastatingly handsome in a way that seemed almost unfair. Dark hair styled perfectly, sharp jawline, eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore a suit that fit him like it had been painted on, and he radiated the kind of confidence that came from never hearing the word. No, he had not smiled once since Sophie entered the room 20 minutes ago. He had barely looked at her. Everything appears to be in order. His voice was deep and cold, like winter wind. You understand the terms? 1 year. No expectations of romance or physical intimacy. Separate living quarters. Public appearances as required. Complete discretion. I understand, Sophie said, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Good. He finally looked up at her, and his gaze made her feel like an insect under a microscope. His eyes swept over her face, her clothing, her nervous posture, and she saw nothing in them but cold calculation. Sign here. Sophie picked up the expensive pen and signed her name on the line. Her hand only shook a little. Nathaniel signed as well, his signature bold and aggressive. The wedding is scheduled for Saturday at my grandmother's estate. My assistant will send you the details. A car will collect you. Should we maybe talk about this more? Sophie ventured. Get to know each other? He stood up, signaling the meeting was over. There's nothing to know. This is a business transaction. You're providing a service, and I'm compensating you for it. Don't confuse this with anything resembling a real relationship. His words stung, but Sophie stood as well, lifting her chin. I never confused it with anything, Mr. Stone. Good. He walked toward the door, opening it for her, but not out of courtesy. He simply wanted her gone. My assistant will handle all the arrangements. Don't be late on Saturday. The first truth as Sophie reached the doorway, he spoke again, his voice even colder than before. And Sophie, let me be absolutely clear about one thing. She turned to face him. His storm-gray eyes met hers without warmth, without kindness, without anything human at all. You're only here because I had to find someone. My grandmother's meddling left me no choice, and you were convenient. Don't ever imagine this is anything more than that. You're a means to an end, a signature on a document, nothing more. Each word landed like a physical blow. Sophie felt her face flush, anger and hurt mixing together in her chest. Understand perfectly, Mr. Stone, she said, keeping her voice steady through sheer will. And let me be clear as well. I'm not some desperate woman looking for a fairy tale. I'm saving my father's legacy, and you're the price I have to pay. Don't worry. I won't trouble you with anything resembling human emotion. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Sophie walked out of his office with her head high, but her hands were shaking. She had just agreed to marry the coldest man she had ever met. A man who looked at her like she was an unfortunate problem to be managed. She rode the elevator down from the 45th floor, watching the numbers descend, feeling like she was falling. Outside, the city bustled with life. People rushing to meetings, laughing with friends, living normal lives. Sophie stood on the sidewalk and called her best friend Claire. I did it, she said when Claire answered. I signed the contract. Oh, Sophie. Claire's voice was full of concern. Are you sure about this? No, Sophie admitted, watching the traffic flow past. But the gallery is saved. That's what matters. She hung up and started walking, needing to move, needing to think. In 4 days, she would marry a stranger who had made it perfectly clear he despised the situation. A man who saw her as nothing but an obstacle he had to endure. Sophie thought about her father, about his gentle smile, and his belief that every person deserved to be seen and valued. He would have hated this arrangement, but he also would have understood why she was doing it. I'm sorry, Dad, she whispered to the sky. But I couldn't let your dream die. The city noise swallowed her words, and Sophie headed home to prepare for a wedding that would be nothing but a beautiful lie. Saturday morning arrived wrapped in gray clouds that threatened rain. Sophie stood in a hotel suite that cost more per night than her monthly rent, staring at a wedding dress she had never chosen. The gown was beautiful, ivory silk with delicate lace sleeves. But it felt like a costume for a play she'd never auditioned for. A team of strangers had been working on her for 3 hours. Her hair had been curled and pinned into an elegant updo. Her makeup was flawless but felt like a mask. Diamond earrings hung from her ears, borrowed from Victoria Stone's personal collection. They were probably worth more than the gallery's entire inventory. "You look stunning," the stylist said, stepping back to admire her work. Sophie looked at her reflection and barely recognized herself. This polished, elegant woman staring back was not the girl who spent her days in paint-stained jeans, hanging artwork and chatting with customers. This was Mrs. Nathaniel Stone, character she would play for the next 12 months. The ceremony took place in Victoria's estate garden. Despite the threatening weather, white roses lined the aisle, and a string quartet played soft music that should have been romantic, but felt hollow. There were no guests, only Victoria. James Park, Nathaniel's CFO, an only friend, a judge, and a photographer to document the fiction. Sophie walked down the aisle alone, carrying a bouquet of white peonies that someone had thrust into her trembling hands. Her simple white heels sank slightly into the grass with each step. The clouds above seemed to mirror the heaviness in her chest. Nathaniel waited at the altar in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. He looked like he was attending a board meeting, not his own wedding. His face showed no emotion as she approached. No warmth, no nervousness, nothing. He checked his watch once, as if calculating how much time this was taking from his schedule. When Sophie reached him, he did not take her hand. He simply stood there, waiting for the ceremony to begin. The judge spoke about love and commitment and partnership. Sophie wanted to laugh at the bitter irony. When it came time for the vows, Nathaniel's voice was flat and mechanical.
"I do,"
he said, the words carrying as much feeling as reading a grocery list. "I do," Sophie whispered, her voice catching despite her determination to remain strong. The ring Nathaniel slid onto her finger was a massive diamond that caught the dim light. It was beautiful and cold, just like him. When the judge said he could kiss his bride, Nathaniel leaned in and brushed his lips against hers so briefly it could barely be called a kiss. His eyes remained open, watching the photographer, making sure the shot was captured for whatever purpose this charade served. Sophie felt more alone in that moment than she had at her father's funeral. Entering the mansion, the reception was a small dinner at the estate, equally joyless. Sophie sat beside her new husband, picking at food she could not taste, while Victoria made polite conversation and James tried to lighten the mood with stories about the company. Nathaniel checked his phone constantly, his attention anywhere but on his new wife. As the sun began to set, Nathaniel stood abruptly. "It's time to go." A car waited to take them to his home. The drive took 40 minutes, winding through increasingly exclusive neighborhoods until they reached a private road lined with ancient oak trees. The mansion that appeared at the end of the drive took Sophie's breath away. It was modern and massive, all glass and steel and sharp architectural lines. It looked like something from a magazine, beautiful but utterly cold. Lights glowed from within, but they did nothing to make the place feel warm or welcoming. "Welcome home," Mrs. Stone, the driver said, opening her door home. The word felt like a lie. Rosa Martinez. The housekeeper greeted them at the entrance. She was a warm-faced woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and a gentle smile that was the first genuine warmth Sophie had felt all day. "Welcome, dear," Rosa said, and Sophie wanted to hug her. "Let me show you to your room." Nathaniel disappeared immediately, heading toward what Rosa quietly called the East Wing without a word to Sophie. She followed Rosa through the mansion, her heels clicking on marble floors, her eyes taking in the expensive art on the walls, the designer furniture, the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a pool and gardens. Everything was perfect and sterile, like a showroom where no one actually lived. Rosa led her upstairs and down a long hallway. "Mr. Stone's quarters are in the East Wing," she explained gently. "Your suite is here in the West Wing." The room Rosa showed her was larger than Sophie's entire apartment. It had a king-sized bed with soft gray linens, a sitting area with a couch and chairs, a walk-in closet already filled with clothes Sophie had never seen, and a bathroom made of marble and gold fixtures. "If you need anything, just press this button." Rosa showed her an intercom system on the wall. I'll bring dinner to your room tonight. I imagine you must be exhausted. Thank you, Rosa, Sophie said, and her voice cracked. Rosa touched her arm gently. It will get easier, dear. Give it time. After Rosa left, Sophie sat on the edge of the enormous bed and let the tears finally fall. She had saved her father's gallery, yes, but at what cost? She was married to a man who could not stand to be in the same room with her, living in a beautiful prison, playing a role that felt like it was slowly erasing who she really was. Her phone buzzed. A text from Claire. How are you holding up? Sophie typed back, I made a terrible mistake, but it was too late now. She was Mrs. Nathaniel Stone for the next year. And there was no escape from the contract she had signed. The first week, the days that followed fell into a strange, lonely pattern. Nathaniel left before dawn each morning and returned well after midnight. Sophie barely saw him, which seemed to be exactly what he wanted. She wandered the massive mansion like a ghost, exploring rooms that looked expensive but unused, gardens that were maintained but never enjoyed. Rosa became her only real companion. The housekeeper seemed to understand Sophie's loneliness without it being spoken. She made sure Sophie ate, checked on her throughout the day, and shared stories about her own family that made the cold house feel slightly warmer. Mr. Stone has always been this way, Rosa said one morning, as she and Sophie sat in the kitchen. Ever since his parents died in that car accident when he was 16, he closed himself off from everyone. That's sad, Sophie said, meaning it despite her anger at him. It is, Rosa agreed. But walls can be knocked down if someone is patient enough. Sophie was not sure she wanted to be that patient. She was here for a year, nothing more. Nathaniel had made his feelings perfectly clear. To fill the empty hours, Sophie started painting again. She set up a small studio in her room using supplies she ordered online. She painted the gallery, her father's face, memories of better times. The art became her escape, her way of holding on to herself in this strange new life. She also started baking, something her father had taught her. The mansion's enormous kitchen became her sanctuary. She made her father's favorite chocolate chip cookies, his special banana bread, the cinnamon rolls he always bought for Sunday breakfast. The familiar smells filled the cold house, and Rosa smiled every time she walked into the kitchen. You're bringing life to this place, Rosa said. It's been too quiet for too long. On the fifth night, Sophie was in the kitchen late, unable to sleep. She was pulling a tray of cookies from the oven when she heard footsteps. She turned to find Nathaniel standing in the doorway, still in his suit despite the late hour, staring at her like she was something he could not understand. What are you doing? His voice held confusion more than coldness. Baking. I couldn't sleep. Sophie set down the hot tray. Would you like one? It's past midnight. Cookies don't care what time it is. Something almost like amusement flickered across his face, but he caught it quickly. I don't eat sweets. Your loss, Sophie said, biting into a warm cookie and savoring the melted chocolate. Nathaniel stood there for another long moment. Sophie noticed how tired he looked. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his usually perfect posture sagged slightly. The house smells different, he said finally, like a home instead of a museum. His jaw tightened. I have work to do. He turned to leave. Nathaniel stopped, but did not turn around. His shoulders tensed. We're going to be living here for a year, Sophie said. We don't have to be enemies. Could we at least try to be civil? We're not enemies. His voice was flat. We're strangers fulfilling a contract. We could be civil strangers then. He turned slowly, his storm gray eyes studying her face, really looking at her for the first time since the wedding. His gaze traveled over her messy ponytail, her flower-dusted pajamas, the hopeful expression she was trying to maintain. Fine, he said finally. Civil. Then he was gone, disappearing back into his wing of the house. But the next morning, Sophie noticed the plate of cookies she had left covered on the counter was empty. The charity Galitha call came from James Park on Wednesday morning. Mrs. Stone, the annual Stone Technologies charity gala, is this Saturday. You and Nathaniel will need to attend together. Sophie's stomach dropped. Their first public appearance as a married couple, the preparation was overwhelming. A team arrived at the mansion on Saturday afternoon, transforming Sophie into the perfect society wife. They chose a deep sapphire blue gown that hugged her curves before flowing to the floor like water. Her hair was styled in elegant waves. Diamonds glittered at her throat and wrists, borrowed pieces that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. When Sophie descended the grand staircase, Nathaniel was waiting in the foyer. He wore a black tuxedo that made him look dangerous and powerful. He glanced up as she approached, and for just a moment, his carefully controlled expression cracked. His eyes widened, his lips parted slightly, and Sophie saw something human flicker across his face before he locked it away again. "You look acceptable," he said, his voice rough. Sophie almost laughed. Coming from Nathaniel Stone, that was practically poetry. In the limousine, Nathaniel briefed her like she was an employee. "Smile. Be polite. Don't discuss our personal life or the circumstances of our marriage. We're presenting as a happily married couple who fell in love quickly. Several major investors will be there, including the board members who need to believe this marriage is real for my grandfather's will to be honored. Can you handle that?" "I understand my role," Sophie said, keeping her voice steady. The gala was held at the city's most exclusive hotel, in a ballroom that looked like something from a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing light across marble floors. Hundreds of people in designer gowns and tuxedos mingled, champagne glasses in hand. A live orchestra played soft classical music. Sophie felt completely out of her depth, but she refused to let it show. Nathaniel placed his hand on the small of her back as they entered. The first time he had voluntarily touched her since the wedding kiss. His touch was warm through the thin fabric of her dress, and Sophie tried to ignore how it made her heart race. They moved through the crowd together, Nathaniel introducing her to a parade of executives, investors, and society figures. Sophie smiled until her face hurt, made polite small talk, played the role of the devoted new wife. She laughed at appropriate moments, touched Nathaniel's arm with just the right amount of affection, and pretended her heart was not pounding with anxiety. "She's lovely," Nathaniel, an older woman in diamonds, said. "So refreshing and genuine. Not at all like your usual type." Sophie felt Nathaniel stiffen beside her, his hand tightening slightly on her back, but his smile never wavered. "Sophie is unlike anyone I've ever known," he said. And the words sounded almost true. As the evening wore on, Sophie began to relax slightly. These were just people, despite their wealth and status. She found herself genuinely enjoying conversations with some of them, discussing art with a collector who had visited her father's gallery, talking about community programs with a philanthropist who actually cared about making a difference. During dinner, seated at a table with board members and their spouses, Nathaniel's hand found hers under the table. He squeezed gently, and when Sophie looked at him in surprise, he leaned close and whispered, "You're doing perfectly." The warmth in his voice shocked her. It was the first kind thing he had said since they met. Later, when the orchestra began playing and couples moved to the dance floor, Nathaniel stood and offered his hand. "We should dance. They're watching." Sophie let him lead her onto the floor. His hand settled on her waist, and she placed hers on his shoulder. They moved together slowly, and Sophie was surprised by how easily they fit, how natural it felt despite everything. "You're full of surprises," Nathaniel said, his voice low. "The way you talked to Mr. Harrison about community art programs impressed him. He's one of our most difficult board members." "I was just being myself," Sophie said. "Exactly." His gray eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw something soften in them. "Thank you for tonight. I know this isn't easy. Neither is living in a house with someone who barely acknowledges I exist." His jaw tightened. "I told you what this arrangement was." "You did," Sophie agreed. "But we're still people, Nathaniel. We don't have to be cruel about it." The song ended, and Nathaniel stepped back, the walls slamming back into place. "I should speak with the board chair. Mingle. Play your part." He walked away, leaving Sophie alone on the dance floor. But later that night, when they returned to the mansion, Nathaniel walked Sophie to her wing instead of disappearing immediately. At her door, he paused. "You handled yourself well tonight," he said. "Better than I expected." "High praise," Sophie said, unable to keep the sarcasm from her voice. "Sophie, His voice was serious. I know I've been difficult. This situation is not what I wanted. It's not what I wanted either, she said softly. But we're in it now. Could we at least try to make it bearable? Nathaniel studied her face in the dim hallway light. I'll try, he said finally. Good night, Sophie. Good night, Nathaniel. Sophie watched him walk away, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe the next year would not be quite as unbearable as she feared. Maybe the cold, distant man she had married had a human heart, buried somewhere beneath all that ice. Maybe walls really could be knocked down, if someone was patient enough to try. The week following the gala brought subtle shifts in the mansion's atmosphere. Nathaniel still left early and returned late, but now he occasionally stopped by the kitchen when he smelled Sophie's baking. He never stayed long, never said much, but his presence felt less hostile. Sophie continued painting and baking, filling the empty hours with creativity. She transformed a sun-filled room on the main floor into her art studio. Nathaniel did not object when Rosa helped her move supplies. One morning, Sophie found a set of professional-grade oil paints delivered to her studio with a note in sharp handwriting. Rosa mentioned you needed these. No signature. But Sophie knew who sent them. She also began volunteering at the community center downtown, teaching art classes to children. It gave her purpose beyond being Mrs. Nathaniel Stone, a role that still felt like wearing someone else's skin. The kids reminded her why she loved art in the first place. Their uninhibited creativity and pure joy in making something beautiful. Rosa noticed the changes too. He's watching you, she said one afternoon as they prepared dinner together. Sophie had insisted on cooking, needing the comfort of familiar tasks. What do you mean? Sophie stirred the sauce, the aroma of garlic and tomatoes filling the kitchen. Mr. Stone? He stands in doorways sometimes, just watching you paint or cook. He thinks no one notices, but I do. Rosa smiled knowingly. That man has not looked at another human being with interest in years. You're getting under his skin. He barely tolerates me, Rosa. Barely tolerates anyone, dear. But with you, he's trying. That's something. That evening, for the first time, Nathaniel came home at a reasonable hour. Sophie was in the living room, sketching in her journal, when he entered. He loosened his tie, looking tired, but not quite as guarded as usual. Good evening, he said, the greeting stiff but genuine. Sophie looked up from her sketch. Rough day? The board is pushing back on the new product launch timeline. He sat in the chair across from her, something he had never done before. They don't understand the market dynamics. Sophie set down her pencil. Tell me about it. You wouldn't understand the technical aspects? Try me. So Nathaniel explained his vision for a new software platform. His frustration with the board's conservative approach, his certainty that waiting would cost them market advantage. As he talked, his face became animated, passionate. Sophie saw glimpses of the brilliant mind that had built an empire, the drive that pushed him forward. You're not just a businessman, Sophie said when he finished. You're an artist in your own way. You see possibilities others miss and create something from nothing. Nathaniel stared at her, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. I never thought of it that way. My father always said creation takes courage, whether you're painting a canvas or building a company. You have to believe in something that doesn't exist yet and convince others to believe too. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. He was. Sophie's voice softened. I miss him every day. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and Sophie realized this was the first real conversation they had ever had. Not contract negotiations or cold formalities, but actual human connection. I should let you work, Nathaniel said, standing. But he paused at the doorway. Thank you, Sophie. For listening. Anytime, she said, meaning it. The breakthrough. 2 weeks later, James Park invited them to dinner at his home. Bring Sophie, he had told Nathaniel. My wife is eager to meet her, and it would be good for the board members to see you two in a casual social setting, Nathaniel agreed, though Sophie could see his reluctance. They drove to James's house in silence, the late spring evening warm and filled with the scent of blooming flowers. James lived in a beautiful but comfortable home in the suburbs, the kind of place that felt lived in and loved. James's wife, Monica, greeted them warmly. She was a kindergarten teacher with an easy smile and kind eyes. Their 2 children, a boy and girl aged 7 and 5, ran through the house with the chaotic energy of happy kids. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you," Monica said, hugging Sophie like they were old friends. "James has told me so much about the wedding." Dinner was casual and warm, nothing like the formal affairs Sophie had attended with Nathaniel. The children chattered about school and friends. Monica shared funny stories about her students. James and Nathaniel talked business, but in a relaxed way that showed their genuine friendship. Sophie watched Nathaniel slowly relax, his shoulders losing their usual tension. When James's daughter Emma climbed into his lap and asked him to read her a story, Nathaniel looked panicked for a moment. Then something in his face softened, and he read to the little girl with surprising gentleness. Sophie's heart twisted watching him. This was the man beneath the ice, the human being he kept locked away. After dinner, Monica put the children to bed. The 4 adults sat in the backyard under string lights, drinking wine and talking. James told stories about college before Nathaniel's parents died. When Nathaniel had been different, lighter, more open. He was the first person to volunteer for every crazy adventure, James said, laughing. "Remember that road trip to California? You drove straight through because you wanted to see the sunrise over the Pacific." "I was young and stupid," Nathaniel said, but there was a hint of a smile on his face. "You were alive," James corrected gently. "You let yourself feel things." Nathaniel's expression closed slightly. "Life changes. People change." Sophie reached over and took his hand without thinking. "Change can go both ways," she said softly. Nathaniel looked at their joined hands, then at her face. His fingers tightened around hers. On the drive home, they talked more easily than they ever had. Nathaniel asked about Sophie's art classes at the community center, her plans for the gallery when the year ended, her dreams for the future. He listened, really listened, asking thoughtful questions that showed genuine interest. When they reached the mansion, neither of them moved to get out of the car immediately. "Thank you for tonight," Nathaniel said. "I know my grandmother forced you into this situation. You've handled it with more grace than I deserved. You've been dealing with an impossible situation too," Sophie said. "I understand that better now. I've been cruel to you." His voice was rough with emotion. "That first day, the things I said, you didn't deserve that." "No," Sophie agreed. "I didn't. I'm sorry, Sophie. Truly." It was the first time he had apologized for anything. Sophie felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you for saying that." They sat in silence for another moment, the night quiet around them. "Would you like to have breakfast together tomorrow?" Nathaniel asked. "I could come home early and we could eat together before I leave for work." Sophie smiled. "I'd like that." The crisis 3 days later, everything changed. Sophie was teaching her art class at the community center when her phone rang with a call from Rosa, the housekeeper's voice frantic. "Sophie, you need to come home immediately." "It's Mr. Stone. There's been an accident." Sophie's blood turned to ice. She left her class with another volunteer and raced home, her heart pounding. She found Rosa in the foyer, tears streaming down her face. "What happened?" Sophie demanded. "He collapsed at the office. They think it was his heart. James brought him home instead of the hospital because Mr. Stone refused to go. He's in his room. He won't let anyone help him." Sophie ran up the stairs and through the house to the east wing, the part of the mansion she had never entered. She found Nathaniel's bedroom door and knocked hard. "Go away." His voice was weak, pained. Sophie opened the door. Nathaniel was sitting on his bed, shirt unbuttoned, his face pale and covered in sweat. He looked up at her with fury and something else's fear. "Not happening." Sophie crossed the room and knelt in front of him. "Let me see. It's nothing. Just stress and exhaustion. Nathaniel, please." Sophie took his hands, feeling how cold they were. "Let me help you." His resistance crumbled. "I'm fine. I just need rest." But he was not fine. Sophie could see it in his eyes, the vulnerability he always hid now exposed. She helped him lie back, removed his shoes, covered him with a blanket. She sat beside him on the bed, stroking his hair like her father used to do when she was sick as a child. "You don't have to stay," Nathaniel whispered. But his hand gripped hers tightly. I want to stay. What? She sat with him through the night, holding his hand, bringing him water, refusing to leave despite his weak protests. At some point, Nathaniel fell into an exhausted sleep, and Sophie stayed beside him, watching the rise and fall of his chest, terrified every time his breathing seemed to hitch. In the early morning hours, Nathaniel woke. His color was better, his breathing steadier. He looked at Sophie, who had dozed off in the chair beside his bed. Sophie, he whispered. Her eyes opened immediately. How do you feel? Better. Foolish. He sat up slowly. You stayed. Of course I stayed. Why? His voice was raw. I've been nothing but cold to you. I told you that you meant nothing. Why would you stay? Sophie reached out and cupped his face gently. Because somewhere along the way, despite everything, I started to care about you. The real you, not the cold mask you show the world. Nathaniel's eyes filled with tears. He tried to blink away. I don't deserve your kindness. Maybe not, Sophie said softly. But you have it anyway. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, holding her like she was the only solid thing in a spinning world. Sophie held him back, feeling his heart beat against hers. I'm scared, Sophie, he whispered into her hair. Of feeling again. Of letting someone matter. Everyone I've loved has left me. I'm not going anywhere, Sophie promised. Not for the next year, at least. And maybe not even then, if you stop being such an idiot about things. He laughed, the sound watery, but genuine. I've been a spectacular idiot. It's the worst, Sophie agreed. They stayed like that as dawn broke through the windows. Two people who had been forced together, discovering something neither of them expected: genuine connection. The beginning of real love. The new beginning that Dr. James insisted on bringing to examine. Nathaniel diagnosed severe exhaustion and stress. He prescribed rest, better eating habits, and less work. Nathaniel argued, but one look from Sophie silenced him. Over the following weeks, Nathaniel began working from home more often. He and Sophie fell into new routines. They had breakfast together every morning, real conversations over coffee and the pastries Sophie baked. Nathaniel started joining her in the art studio, watching her paint, sometimes trying his own hand at it with comically terrible results that made them both laugh. He attended her community center art classes, helping the children with their projects, surprising everyone with his patience. Sophie watched him kneel beside a shy little boy, helping him mix colors, encouraging him to be bold, and her heart swelled with affection. Victoria Stone visited one afternoon and found them in the garden, Nathaniel reading while Sophie sketched. The older woman watched them for a moment, a satisfied smile on her face. I knew you two would be good for each other, she said. You're a meddling woman. Grandmother? Nathaniel said, but there was warmth in his voice. Someone had to save you from yourself. Victoria looked at Sophie. Thank you for seeing past his walls. Someone had to, Sophie said, echoing Nathaniel's words. One evening, Nathaniel found Sophie in her studio working on a large canvas. She was painting the mansion, but in her version, warm light glowed from every window, and the stark modern lines seemed softer, more welcoming.